What I'm trying to do in my work is to always bring elements of the reality, of course. So for example, we always know more or less where it is, if it's on a beach or if we have like a tree, a cave, or we can recognize elements. But at the same time, I also keep the part of ambiguity. So I'm trying for the observer to really question what he's looking at. Also, another thing that I'm trying to do is to always leave bits of the construction. So I never try to hide the construction. It's always there for you to really verify that it's not Photoshop montage, for example, but it has been really made in situ. So in my images, I'm interested in the trompe-l'œil, the effect that when you place an image, a 2D image, within a 3D space, but at the end, when you take a photograph, it becomes a 2D again. So a 2D in a 2D works, which is always quite interesting to me, because when I place sometimes a backdrop, it doesn't look like anything, but then suddenly when I place my camera in the right angle and I rephotograph it, then it works. What really interested me is how I can place a material in a space and change the perspective of a space. So for example, if I take a picture of a forest that is pretty basic in a way, like just a plain piece of a forest, and then suddenly if I put just a plastic sheets hanging, there is a completely different perspective, because it looks like maybe the water is falling, and then it looks like it's a riverbed. If I just put one thing, quite a simple material, at the end of the day it's not a huge scenography, it's just one material, how can I change the landscape with just one thing? With Les Amants, I started to go outside and to do all my installations outside, and I used artificial materials, so fabric and cardboard, that I placed in the nature, and I was very much interested in this confrontation between the man-made and the organic. I guess the most important one of the series Les Amants was a waterfall made of plastic sheets. There were different ways of looking at it, and obviously because it looked like a waterfall. So the second series, Haven Her Body Was, I realized that I was very, very much interested in remote and isolated spaces. Those spaces that exist in a real geography, but at the same time they also exist in human imagination and the common consciousness of what is a cave, for example, or what is an island. If we think of, like for example, a tropical space or a space that is, it's there, we know it's there, but at the same time we put a lot of our stories and myths and legends into those spaces. Those spaces are there, but they live in a parallel almost to our world. I was very much interested in all the edifices and the structures that were in relation with nature and in direct relation to nature, which we can call the geomorphic architecture, an architecture that either is built within the nature completely or to observe nature. And for example, some observatories were considered as geomorphic architectures. And I became quite interested in some observatories of India, so what we call the cosmic architectures. So the most famous is the Jantar Mantar observatories in Jaipur, and those buildings, edifices that were built to have this kind of direct relation to the sky, almost to build on Earth a sort of bridge between the sky and the Earth. And what really interested me in those buildings was mainly the stairs going towards the sky. It was kind of this sort of idea of walking towards the sky, kind of really having this, this trajectory. I traveled a lot to France, in England and Germany, and I photographed fragments of buildings, and then I printed them on pieces of paper, and then I mounted them on a cardboard. So they were about 1.50 meters high, and then I was holding them in a landscape. The buildings are totally flat. They are like facades, and they are not in volume at all. And the shadows on the buildings were because I just photographed them with this type of light. And the shadow on the floor is very flat. It's the shadow of just this flat cardboard and the shadow of the person holding it at the back. What I wanted to do with the observatoires is to have a typology of those edifices. And therefore, in order to accentuate that, I decided to use the black and white to sort of enter almost the field of the archival prints. I think it's quite offering spaces in which people can really recognize what they have to recognize in a way, but to leave it as open as possible. So it's not about a particular religion or a particular cultural point. It's not even about really environment. People would see the fragility of the nature in the photograph and would, question the landscape. But it's not necessarily about that. I think it's about many different things. It's about what we want it to be in a way. Satellite stations is about how we observe the sky and the relationship we kind of cultivate with the sky. What I was fascinated about is those stories before the invention of the telescope. So before we could actually see the sky with a closer look, but how people used to look at the sky with their bare eyes and identify it, measure it, and then all the stories and the myths that were taught at that moment. And also I kind of, because of course I'm questioning the space we live in and on Earth, but then at the time it was always somehow related to how we looked at the sky. So one of the stories that particularly interested me to build this series was all the stories about the celestial vault. The fact that the world in the Antiquity and the Middle Ages, the universe was considered as closed, like if there was a wall, a fixed wall that was kind of in which we were sort of evolving, and this idea of infinity arrived, in the Renaissance, and this kind of wall that you can almost perhaps touch and where the universe stopped, quite reassuring in a way. Some of the spheres look very three-dimensional, and we played with the light to make it look more three-dimensional, but they're actually just discs, so completely flat. So now I'm working on a series which I call Les Mécaniques, and it's about the movement of the landscape, so how the landscape is sort of shown as a moving entity. This came from the series Southern Light Stations. I started to work with materials that were in movement. So I worked, for example, with water-soluble paper. So when I put water on it, it dissolved completely, and then I photographed that while it was dissolving. So I became more and more interested in photographing things that were moving, which I've never done before, because all the previous installations were very much static. So Les Mécaniques is about showing the transition and the movement of this landscape. So for example, the first series that I'm working on, it's actually a triptych, where I want to go in a jungle. So I have a shoot plan in Thailand, in a very a primary jungle, where the idea is to have a very, very large mirror, and I will have a structure with only a few mirrors, and then I will add some mirrors so that it will look like a square. And the idea is to really question this kind of destruction of the jungle and the way the jungle is evolving and moving all the time, or the human impact onto this kind of forest. I never want to show something that is really obvious, or I'm not interested in that. I'm more interested in building installations that are more ambiguous. It was really a pleasure this year to talk with Christophe Weiners and Florence Bourgeois about this project in Paris Photo, and I really enjoyed talking to them about the way they want the fair to really show as much different type of photography as possible, and how photography can be also very much linked to dance, for example, or choreography, or sculpture, or painting, and it's not about putting things in one box, photography in one box, but to showing it, in relation to other type of forms of art. I'm very, very much looking forward to have this triptych in the fair. It's a very brilliant fair because it's so big and it attracts so many people, and of course the quality is great. So it's a moment of gathering also. So it's galleries, but it's also curators, it's a lot of different artists. So to me it's an important moment because we kind of all gathered in Paris during this, you know, important moment. So even people from, I don't know, Ireland and the UK come in, and we, you know, it's a good, I think that's the good thing about a fair to me.